All right, live from Studio 6B, 30 minutes past the hour. Real America's Voice on a Wednesday night. Glad you're in. Slick Rick sitting right there. He's going to do some more sports. Delgado's got some more news coming up. Crazy Town in hour two. LOL of the day coming up as well. Plus, we'll get into some stories. We'll give you an update on what's going on in Ohio. I've got a great article on Ohio that breaks down a whole lot of stuff. We'll spend some time on it because, of course, no one else really is. We'll continue to spend some time on that as well. We'll spend some time on the Chinese balloons and Gordon Chang. He's got a piece in the New York Post today saying, this is no mistake, folks. We better wake up. China's balloons are hinting at an attack. So we'll get to that. But right now, please welcome to the show Matt Cain. He's a writer, op-ed contributor to the American Thinker. You can follow him on Truth Social at Matt Cain, MattKane. His latest piece is entitled "The DeSantis is Trump Without the Baggage Crowd is in for a rude awakening," which I noticed got a retruth tonight from President Donald J. Trump. Matt, how are you?
I'm great. How are you guys doing? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And I saw the president retweeted your article tonight. So that's got to feel pretty good. Tell me, this is your first article with the American Thinker, I think you said, which I love. It's one of the first places I go every single day. It's very timely, obviously, because there's a lot of talk about Trump, DeSantis. President Trump has obviously announced. Now you have Nikki Haley. I've been saying that the more the merrier for President Trump. He's got to feel more confident the more the people get in. I say he's got a 30% of the base locked up no matter what he does. Tell me a little bit about why you wanted to write this article now and give the audience a little overview of basically the two or three major points that you try to make in the article.
Yeah, as you said, the timing of it is pretty important because I think as you see people starting to focus more on the primary season, there's a lot of narratives that sort of create themselves as time goes on. So it's important to know who you're voting for. And the message I was trying to drive in what I was writing was a lot of this baggage. I've heard it from a few, small groups. It's nowhere near the majority, but certainly there's a group of conservatives that sort of feel what I was writing about, that it's not about the policy or the job they would do, but DeSantis offers a better option than Trump simply because of the baggage. And it's important to realize all of the baggage that's been created towards President Trump and associated with him, it's not real baggage. It's simply manufactured baggage that what's going to stop them from creating that for any other candidate? So the way I see it is if they create baggage for you, it means you're a threat to them, and I'm going to vote for you. And if they don't create it for you, then you're probably not really for the people. So the main point to drive was, I understand if you consume too much mainstream media that you may feel that there's a lot of baggage, but if you really focus on what's important and tune out some of the narratives that are out there, and you look at the border and you look at retirement accounts, you look at the economy as a whole, there's so many things that under President Trump were great. And if you didn't concern yourself with mainstream media, you wouldn't have known there was baggage at all because there really isn't any. So that was the message I was trying to drive. If you feel President Trump is the best man for the job, you should vote for him. This isn't a time for conservatives to be conceding for someone that they feel might not be as good, but it's almost a fear thing. You're afraid of too much baggage. Don't worry about the baggage. The baggage isn't real. If you focus on what's important, then you know who you should be voting for if you're in that camp. So that was the message I was really trying to drive home.
Yeah. So let me ask you a couple of things. Obviously, what Governor DeSantis has done in Florida, as far as from what I have been able to report on and what we've seen in some of the legislation in the state legislature down there and what they've been doing, I think he continues to raise the bar for red state governors, because I've been arguing, as important as the midterm elections were, I've been saying on this show that these state legislatures and these governor races have been much more important and will continue to be very, very important, because these are the people that really affect your lives, especially what we've gone through with COVID, fascism, and these vaccine mandates. Now, these governors are really the firewall between you and the tyranny of the federal government. So have you been a fan, putting aside the Trump-DeSantis thing that people like to play on, have you been a fan of Governor DeSantis and what he has done in Florida?
Well, I'm not from Florida. I'm in New York. So there's a lot of things going on in my state that I'm not a fan of. So I haven't followed too closely with what goes on in Florida. But what you mentioned about governors and state legislatures, that's 100% correct, because all branches of government are meant to prevent one from gaining too much power. So when you have a good federal government, it really makes things a lot easier at the state level. But when you see what's going on today, you really rely on your states to sort of have your back if you're, a person that lives in a certain state. So, for example, I live in New York. Things have not been better since Joe Biden took office in this state, but you mentioned Florida. if your state legislature really takes care of what they are capable of taking care of, then you're absolutely right. They could really thwart a lot of the bad things going on. So, you mentioned problems with elections. That's something I also touched on in my article. If your state legislatures really do what they should be doing and they make sure they're the ones making changes to election law and they're the ones who are really taking the power they have and using it, then you could kind of survive a lot better during a federal government such as that we have now, as opposed to being in a blue state where they're sort of using that to their advantage. So it's very important to state level elections as well. And you could really make a big change by starting at the local level. So it's very important.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit. I know election integrity is something that's important to you. You've written about, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about a little bit about that, because, I feel like Republicans never win the argument on election integrity. And, this whole you're an election denier nonsense that you always get thrown around from the media. We went through it in 2020 with Trump. We went through it with Kerry Lake just recently. And I feel like I've always put election integrity into kind of like two buckets, especially when looking at 2020. You had kind of the machine problems, chain of custody problems, but the bigger bucket for me was always what happened before Election Day in November of 2020, as we saw and we came to learn about violations to the federal Constitution and the state legislatures, as the power was really taken away from state legislatures in violation of Article 2. It says each state shall appoint in such a manner as the legislature thereof may direct. As you saw in Georgia with Stacey Abrams, as she has a consent decree with the state legislature no one knows about. You see in Pennsylvania what happened with the state constitution not followed. So give me your thoughts about that. Do you separate the fraud, quote unquote, into, like as I'm doing, into two buckets? Or where, as we look to 24 and a road to 270, I've been arguing it's hard to make a road to 270 if you can't win Nevada, you can't win Pennsylvania, you can't win these places. Give me your thoughts on where we are right now as we head into this election cycle.
I understand where you're coming from. I don't think it's two separate buckets. I do think it has to be fully coordinated, because it only strengthens, if they want to steal elections, having as many avenues open for them to do that as possible is their goal. So I think it's totally coordinated. But, it is important. You mentioned the state legislatures, and if they're preventing ballots from coming in days after a deadline because they have that authority, and it's also a convenient way for them to spin it. They make it so that you sympathize with them and saying these, COVID has created such a chaotic thing. We need to count votes for days at a time. Well, I don't think the founders put in the Constitution that if something like that arises, that any governor or secretary of state has the authority to make decisions based on what they personally feel. It has to go through the legislature, as you mentioned. So it's all important. Machines, mail-in ballots, late vote counting. I think it's all coordinated. I don't think it's two separate buckets. And looking to 2024, as you mentioned, there's certainly been improvements, but we also just saw, as you mentioned, Kerry Lake this past election season, more of the same from 2020. So it's hard to say there's confidence. I have no doubt who would win an election. It's about whether they will let the winner take office and be known to be the winner. So there's improvement. There needs to be more improvement. And I think you're seeing that. There are a lot of cases. Kerry Lake's fighting very hard, as she should. One of the things that drives me nuts is when people say, it's time to move on. When are you going to give it up? Well, at that point, you're just going to have more of the same every 2 years, and you're kidding yourself. So she's fought very hard. I believe there's a Georgia case that was just resubmitted to the Georgia Supreme Court docket, run by Garland Favorito, I believe. So there's people still fighting. It doesn't get the coverage it deserves, but there's optimism for the future because people haven't thrown in the towel as much as I think the left would like them to. And there's also the Brunson case where they're really trying to get to the bottom of it in one big swoop, basically. So there's hope in that regard, not so much because of the changes that have already been made, but because of the fight that people are still invested in. And that's really all you could have at this point. So optimism, but maybe not for the reasons some other people are looking for.
Yeah, and I know you've written about the Brunson case, and I always thought the Brunson case was interesting because I've always said that, the role of the vice president on that day, on January 6th, is kind of not really defined in the Constitution. And I've always said, Mike Pence, I always thought had more leniency than maybe he led on to, or he thought he did that day, to reject electors, because the idea that electors would have come to Congress the way they did through what we've been talking about, through the way that these things were changed at the state legislatures, the idea that electors would come to Congress like that Boy, I tell you, I think the role of the vice president that day is something that still needs to be discussed and looked at. And the Brunson case, in a way, kind of, for me, was kind of angling towards that whole thing, saying, okay, we're not going after specific lists saying it was stolen. We're going after the actual people who are not living up to the oath that they took to defend the Constitution. What was your thoughts on the Brunson case?
It's sort of genius when you really think about it. They say it's so hard to prove election fraud in court, and it really isn't, but they make it difficult is what I'm trying to say. So when you get to the root of it, and if you could just sort of get to the reason why the fraud was allowed to happen without saying, hey, it was because of signature verifications or machines or mail-in votes, you don't have to get into any of that. You simply have to say these people swore an oath. The Constitution says they're bound to the oath. It's not ceremonious. You're bound to it. And if they didn't follow it, then technically speaking, matter of fact, they broke their oath. And it very clearly states what happens when you break your oath of office. So I love the Brunson case. I think it's so simple. I hate to use the word, but it's actually genius because of it. It's almost like, why didn't anyone else see this? But they seem to be doing a great job with it. They're gaining a lot of momentum. And it certainly seems like that's the type of bold thinking we need. It's not time to play it safe. So what they're doing is remarkable. And if you follow the case, they really started from the ground up. I mean, no one was pulling their strings. They haven't gone to any major attorneys. They're really just patriots. They love the country. They hate to see what's happening to it. And they put their work to the test. And that's really, really what, if you think about it, should happen in this country. If this country is going to get saved and improved from where it's been the last 2 years, it needs to be the people. So it's almost kind of an underlying theme that the fact that it's coming from the people gives me even more hope for it, as opposed to the same people that we, rely on that never really deliver in the end. So I'm hopeful for that. I think they're great and they're doing a great job.
Well, you've been great. Well, it's been great to have you on. Again, we're speaking with Matt Cain. You can follow him on Truth Social at Matt Cain, spelled Kane. His latest piece is The American Thinker. Just one last thing. I got about a minute here left. So do you believe, as I do, that the more the merrier for President Trump in this primary, that the more the field gets spread out? He's still got his 35% locked down. And do you in the end expect DeSantis to jump in? As you said, he really hasn't been challenged on a lot of things in his background in the article you talk about. Give me your final thoughts on that.
I believe he's laying the groundwork to jump in. Again, I don't know that. I could be wrong, but it certainly seems like it. And in terms of enough to win, and I think about this very matter-of-factly, if elections are clean, nobody could beat President Trump. And it's very clear to me, because if they were clean, they wouldn't have to go to such lengths to cheat and make it seem like he's not winning, right? So to me, just 2 short years ago, he got the most votes of any man in American history. He says sitting president, but it's really any man, any candidate ever. He got more than the first time he ran. To me, you can't convince me that there's anyone else on this earth who could get more votes than he did. Since he left, things have gone even worse. It's not like they kicked him out of office, right? And then they put in someone who did a great job and people kind of forgotten about him. Yeah. Since he's left, I feel like they've only needed him more. So yeah. I think no matter who gets in, it's his race. Well,
it's great having you on. Love to have you on again. Matt Cain, right here on Live from Studio 6B. Matt, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Follow him on Truth at Matt Cain, MATTKANE. Go read his piece in The American Thinker. Live from Studio 6B. More to do. We're back right after this.